What's going on, everybody? Sharif back again with another video about one of the knives that I designed. The Kubey Veloce, yes. This is one of a batch of knives that I designed back in 2019 that hit the market not too long ago. And also, just so you know, there is a whole group of them that are still yet to come out, so keep an eye out for those in the future. I figured it would be nice to do a little bit of a video because this one stylistically is so different than the Grazioso that it really needs kind of a bit of an explanation as to where the design came from, what were some of the choices and functions that I wanted to make unique to this design. And, you know, I think it's fun to talk about knives, so I'm going to do it. Now, before I forget, this is a new venture for me, creating my own channel and talking about my designs or even my design philosophy in general. So please engage with the channel. I've recently found out that it's not some YouTuber BS. It actually helps if you like, comment, and subscribe. So please help the channel grow and click on all of the usual YouTube BS down below. So, to give you a little bit of background on this, for those of you guys who don't know, I started my design education in automotive design. Yes, it was always my goal to design vehicles and design the next generation of supercars. But as I got into the program, there were a couple of things that frustrated me, which was a lack of research and a lack of thinking through the process, at least with how we were being trained. And I realized that I really like research and I really like analysis. So my career began to go into a different direction. However, I still have an incredibly shall I say, sophisticated understanding of car design, which I usually simply boil down to either that's sexy or that's crap. Perfect example, Subaru, the old WRX body style with the bug eyes, total crap. But I still loved it because I owned it. Now, BRZ, beautiful, beautiful design. Now, when it comes to knives, I try to bring my understanding of design into it. Hence, why the Grazioso, for lack of a better word, looks so sexy. And when I designed a knife like the Veloce, I wanted to bring some of that automotive styling and surfacing into play. And all credit goes to Kubey because they actually really pulled it off. Now, I'll show that to you a bit more when we get into the top-down view. But some of the surfacing elements really do take a bit of sophisticated CNC like work in order to be able to execute. And they did an amazing job, really. Other things that I kind of brought into this, I wanted to experiment a little bit and do some funky stuff with the blade grinds. And again, Kubey executed it brilliantly. Now, before we get into the tabletop view, I will say that this knife is not currently available, except I was told that they may be on knifeglobal.com. Don't quote me on that, but last I checked, you couldn't find these. I was told by Kubey that there is an even more premium version potentially coming out, in S90V. So if you do like this knife, you weren't able to grab one before, just keep an eye out, because dude, S90V, sexy styling, I think is a phenomenal combination. So let me switch the camera view and we'll get into some of my thinking, my ethos, my approach to this design, and the excellent work that Kubey did in executing it. All right, so let's get into this guy. This is the Veloce by Kubey Knives. And this is, as I mentioned before, one of the original designs, actually, that I did when I first started designing knives in 2019. The goal for me really was to bring some of the sports car styling that I came to love doing car design into an everyday usable knife. And I have to give some credit where credit's due. There were two designers who really convinced me that I could go about designing a knife with a sort of atypical aesthetic like this. And the first was Gustavo Cecchini of GTC Knives, and the other was Elijah Isham. Seeing their work and seeing the success of their work really proved to me that there was a place to do something atypical, to do something with, a completely different and non-traditional aesthetic. When designing this knife, I really wanted to bring some of the sports car elements that I love into the styling. Let's look a little bit down here. As you guys know, if you guys, have seen the Grazioso, I love bolster locks. But with this guy, I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be pure titanium. And so one of the ways that I thought about integrating an aesthetic like that without having to go to a dual material approach was through doing this vent here. And that is really where the essence of the automotive styling really comes in. Now, let's close this guy up so we can have a little bit of a better look, easier look at that. The vent for me is one thing that you almost really exclusively see on cars, and I had never seen on a knife. And I feel that it was something truly unique and gave an opportunity to do something with the surfacing of the knife that has never been really done before. One of those things is this sort of transition. Let me see if I can capture it here. Yeah, this is probably the best way for you to see it. There is a surface change between the flat here of the knife and the back side of the knife. This is a nice, gradual, comfortable fillet designed to be comfortable for your hand. And I intentionally chose for the vent to go over top that and through that. So you get this nice sort of transition. But then here, as this line between the flat and the fillet comes into the vent, there is a resolution through here of these two sort of elements competing with one another that creates this sort of Z shape here. Now go outside and look at some of the cars in your neighborhood, or when you go to like Walmart or Target or something, and you will see that in the body side reflections of a lot of modern cars. And that's not something I'd ever seen in knives. I really wanted to bring these sort of subtle surface transitions to the knife world. And another place where you can really see that is the continuation of this line here. As you can see, this portion right here is always in shadow, meaning that it's pointing down. But if I rotate it, you can really see how it begins to twist and capture light. This is very, very difficult stuff to do and execute on with the CNC, let alone with a car. But kudos to Kubey, man. They pulled it off like beautifully. Really, look at how the surfaces just twist and catch light right there. So these are some of the subtle elements that I wanted to bring in terms of lines and surfaces. But then you'll see that this has a nice gradual curve. This isn't just for automotive styling sort of inspiration. That's actually very functional. So you can see that there is this natural curve or crease in your hand. And what I wanted this knife to do was, as you roll your fingers over, for that to mate into that portion of the hand beautifully, which I'm happy to say it does, and gives you a very secure grip. But then this top line of the vent, echoes this. So you get a nice sort of continuation of lines going on here. Speaking of continuation of lines, you'll see that this line of the back and the vent continue forward all the way and continue forward through the cutout and into the fuller. And this was just to create just beautiful harmony between the lines and the surfaces of this knife. And I really, I like that stuff. It's one of the things that just brings me a lot of pleasure to see that, this line tapers here in the same way that the lines taper up front here. It also gave me an opportunity to really do something unique with the blade shape. I could have taken this line all the way out to the tip here, but I didn't. I intentionally chose to give this a little bit of a bump. Now, why did I do that? For those of you who may have noticed, my symbol here, my maker's mark, is that of a raptor. Personally, if you bias towards hawks or falcons, doesn't make a difference to me. I tend to be a peregrine falcon kind of guy. But if you notice, they tend to have a curvature towards their back and then a slight break to their beak. And that's where the inspiration of this line comes from. It's actually an opportunity for me, or I saw it as an opportunity for me, to kind of brand it really heavily as a distinctly Sharif design. You have this nice curvature to the back, and as you get to the beak, the really sharp, dangerous part of the bird, aside from its talons, you have this nice aggressive tip down right here. This also gave me another opportunity to do something very unique with the blade. I've always been a very big fan of compound grind knives. I see it as giving you the best of both worlds. A robust tip for piercing and a thinner, slicier portion here, in the flat or the lower belly of the knife. And I thought about how you could execute that without having to have a distinct separation grind. And funny enough, this tip provided the opportunity. Since this is meant to stay full thickness all the way out into this point, I opted to go with this nice sort of continuous belly blade, which made this portion of the bevel much taller and this portion here much shorter. So believe it or not, actually, the knife through here is quite thin and thickens up here towards the tip. And so this essentially gives me a compound grind knife without having to have a distinctive grind difference, a surface transition in the blade, and keeps the overall aesthetic of the blade nice and continuous and smooth. So this knife actually has a very strong, robust tip in order to do piercing, which I tend to do quite a bit of in my EDC tasks. But then when you need to push cut and slice through things like carbon fiber, you can sit back here on the much thinner portion and get really excellent cutting performance out of a knife with a thicker blade like this. So all of these things began to relate to one another. You have the falcon tip nose, you have these nice broad curves which create a sense of acceleration, you have the vent and the nice surfacing here which really you only see on automotive designs. And you can understand why this knife is called the Veloce, which is an Italian word that suggests speed and velocity, you know, which if you're in particular thinking about raptors, or in my case, peregrine falcons, now you can understand the correlation between all of those things and this particular design. Now, let's look at the backside. One of the things that I personally absolutely despise in a lot of knife designs is when they do not have symmetrical surfacing on both sides, where you get detail on the show side and then a plain side on the back side. I hate it. It drives me absolutely nuts. And I'm not a fan of it under any circumstance. So it was incredibly important for me for the vent to be preserved on the lock side. So you really have that sort of symmetrical surfacing, but also you don't really see sports cars or anything like that with details on only one half of the car, typically, you know. Yes, there are some, you know, examples where that is the case, but those are the exceptions, not the rules. So in preserving that, I actually designed the lock to mimic the exact line here, just a bit lower. And that gives you this really nice soft curve to the lock face or to the lock bar. But then here it kicks up. And again, this portion that kicks up is almost exactly parallel with this edge of the vent. And then this line here, again, is parallel to the vent edge here. So I felt for me that this was the best way to resolve this sort of diving, beautiful lock bar and maintain the lines while still getting enough surface area in order to have a proper lock bar insert. So that's how I really sought to sort of preserve the lines and the character of this knife. One of the other things that I really wanted to do was to not just have some sort of arbitrary pocket clip here. I wanted this to match the rest of the aesthetic and the rest of the lines of this knife. So you'll see that this guy has a similar curvature towards the back of the knife, but also has a cut that mimics the vent here. And you'll notice it's not the same extreme sort of cutback that the vent has. And the thinking there was, or at least how I tended to do things with my car designs, was I would think of all of this kind of terminating at a central point here. So if you were to take this line and pull it back, it would slowly get more vertical. So this gives this sort of relationship, it gives it a relationship, I should say. It doesn't just do an exact mimic of it. There's also another reason for this actually as well. When the clip is in your hand, if it's too pokey up here, right, then you're going to start to feel just the tip of that digging into your hand in different sort of positions or movements. And that's something that I didn't want either. So I was actually quite lucky to discover early on that my aesthetic of sort of generally transitioning the more extreme surfaces to more vertical lines the further back I got actually prevented this from becoming too pokey in the palm of your hand. So all of this is meant to work with one another throughout the knife to kind of create this very consistent and organic sort of design. I hope you've enjoyed this sort of look at the Kubey Veloce. One thing that I maybe didn't talk about here, beyond the aesthetics, was ergonomics, and I did mention a little bit of it here in it nestling into that little crevice of your hand, but I also thought about that from this grip area where your fingers sort of wrap around. All too often, I see designers and manufacturers even putting these notches or flat surfaces, in their knives. A good example of that is the Great White by Gavco. And that works well for some people. Like, I'm very lucky. The Gavco Great White feels like it was designed for my hand. But if you have a hand, let's say, that's just a little bit shorter or less thick than mine, these actually do tend to become hot spots very quickly. And I have experienced that on a number of knives by a number of designers who are, claimed to be like ergonomic geniuses. True ergonomics actually comes from the ability for the knife to fit as many people's hands as possible. And hence why I went with this nice, gentle surfacing. You still do get a bit of grip reinforcement through this curve. And in my case, I get 3 fingers on there very well, and my pinky sits right back here onto this swell, which helps to reinforce my grip and push it into the meat of my hand here. That is something I also took into consideration even with the Grazioso. You'll see that this is more of a 3-finger sort of arrangement with the pinky hitting back here. The Grazioso is more of a 2-finger arrangement, transitioning into a nice, soft, nearly flat surface. But the goal is the same. Now the pinky and my ring finger help to reinforce putting the spine of the handle here into this meat of my hand. That to me is a truly ergonomic knife and is very comfortable to use and doesn't separate anybody out. So if your hands are, like I've mentioned before, I have extra large to double extra large hands, depending on how much boxing practice I do. But if you have large hands or medium hands or even small hands, your hand will find a place on this knife to rest comfortably. And the same thing with the finger choil. A lot of designers do finger choils that fit just their fingers and their fingers alone, and I end up on the blade. But with this, it doesn't matter the size of your finger. You will be able to hit that, and you will be able to get a nice secure grip for doing push cuts. And again, same sort of consideration here on the Grazioso. In fact, they're almost exactly the same. And there's a reason for that. I want to be inclusive with my design rather than exclusive. And in this case, exclusive being a bad thing. So I hope you enjoyed this little look at the Kubey Veloce. My first design actually ever to get manufactured, and still one of my all-time favorites. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this, but just to cover my bases, I'll mention it now. This thing is not currently available to my knowledge, but I have heard through the grapevine at Kubey that they are considering doing a premium version of this in S90V. So if that's something you'd like to see, absolutely hit them up. And if you like this design, let them know that you like manganese steel designs and you want to see my other designs from 2019 come out. So thanks for tuning in. I hope I covered everything. I think I did. There are a few subtle things that I am keeping under wraps just because, you know, you got to keep some of your secrets to yourself in the thinking and the design of the knife. But that should give you the majority of it. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And that's a wrap on I Designed a Knife Part 2.